The lone fan. That guy, right there. He went viral years ago for being the only fan in the away section, celebrating his team's only goal in a 4-1 defeat that was sure to happen anyways. A symbol of the type of dedication we all wish we had, but few of us actually show. But what if I told you that lone fan wasn't just a symbol of the club, but the actual reason for their eventual turnaround? It's such a long story with so many ups and downs that just very recently wrote its most recent chapter that was so improbable, it sounds like it was written by Disney. It's the type of story that restores your faith in football. And to know it, we have to go to the Brazilian State Championships in 2012. We're gonna put an aside right here. I'm gonna do the best I can with the Brazilian pronunciations. I know they're not gonna be 100% on the nose. They're probably not gonna be close, but we'll be showing badges as well, and hopefully you'll be able to keep up at least with who I'm talking about. The scene, FC Santa Cruz at Grêmio. Not Santa Cruz FC, that is a completely different team. This is FC Santa Cruz, just to be specific. And Grêmio are massive favorites, having won the state championship league 42 times. FC Santa Cruz has never won it. Then there's Thiago Reik, a young journalist who was born right next to FC Santa Cruz's stadium, but now lives in Porto Alegre, about 120 kilometers away. He couldn't make many FC Santa Cruz matches these days because of that long drive, but because FC Santa Cruz was on the road in Porto Alegre against Grêmio, he finally had a rare opportunity to watch his favorite team play. And of course, he had absolutely no idea what this would mean for him or his club. As Thiago told it to the BBC, the game was due to start at 9 p.m. and I left work around 8 and went alone, on foot, with my Santa Cruz t-shirt stuffed into my jacket because, well, there would be lots of Grêmio fans around and I didn't want any trouble. When I got to the stadium, I went to the space reserved for our side. I went up to the ticket office and asked if any of the Santa Cruz fan base had arrived yet. This was 20 minutes before the game. The security said no, but I thought it's still early and it's 2 hours from Santa Cruz. Then the game began and no one came. Thiago stood in the away end alone against one of the biggest clubs in Brazil, and improbably, FC Santa Cruz did actually score first. Thiago recalled, "I'm there celebrating, slightly embarrassed because I'm the only one there." But he was there, FC Santa Cruz shirt on, celebrating their stunning lead. They would of course go on to lose 4-1, but not before the relationship between Thiago and all of the fans in the town of Santa Cruz do Sul, where FC Santa Cruz is from, had changed forever. That's because over the course of the match, the TV crew obviously could not overlook the single solitary fan in the away section. He was so heavily focused on the TV broadcast, he began to get texts from family and friends and acquaintances, whether that was him that was continuously being shown on TV, seemingly every 5 seconds. The videos and images became an international sensation, a shining light of commitment to a club for many, but also turning Thiago into the victim of random circumstances that just happened to thrust him into the spotlight. Thiago became the recognizable face of FC Santa Cruz after that match. And you too could be recognizable if you got yourself this kit from Senegal. You can get official kits from around the world like this one from Senegal using Sengalo, the official jersey sponsor of this YouTube channel, and we appreciate them for doing so. If you go to Sengalo, you can find kits from Senegal, Tanzania, Vietnam, Bhutan, anywhere else in the world you could probably think of. They're sourcing kits from the local clubs there and providing you with the opportunity to buy them and be, the center of attention. Yo, where's your kit from? Senegal. What's up? So check out Sengalo in the description, and thank you to them for sponsoring this channel. But much like me wearing this Stade Embor kit, Thiago Reik became a celebrity in Santa Cruz do Sul. He told The Athletic, "I continued to live in Porto Alegre after that, but every time I returned to Santa Cruz, people talked about the story of the lone fan. It was cool." The big issue with this viral moment is that the notoriety Thiago was able to suddenly bring onto FC Santa Cruz did not actually keep the club safe, and soon after, it was relegated to the second division of the state. And this is the moment we take a brief aside to learn how incredibly convoluted the Brazilian leagues are and what is actually happening. Hi, I'm Brazilian Zealand. Like Zealand, but with a little flair. So in Brazil, there are large national leagues, 4 of them specifically, in a pyramid, where they go top league, second league, third league, fourth league, A, B, C, D, literally. And then in every state in Brazil, there are state leagues. These usually run from January to April, and they work in the same system. In every state, it's different, but there'll be a top league, a second league, league, a third league. Depending on the size of the state, this could go on for quite some time. See, FC Santa Cruz was not in the National League and plays in this state league down here. It actually gets quite cold down there. That'll become important later. And in this state, FC Santa Cruz was in the top league, but after finishing really poorly, they got relegated. By 2014, they were playing in the second league of the state. Oh, also, there is a cup competition that is played just between all the teams in this state that has nothing to do with the league system. That'll come into play later too. Thank you, Brazilian me. Now, after FC Santa Cruz got relegated, and entirely unrelated to their relegation, Thiago Reich ended up moving back to Santa Cruz do Sul. He moved on from his job in Porto Alegre, and he was hanging out in Santa Cruz do Sul when he ran into the elected president at the time of FC Santa Cruz. They got to talking, and Thiago mentioned that he was out of work at the time, and the president of FC Santa Cruz offered him a job as the head of communications for the club. And while this sounds like it'd be a big-time position at a major club, FC Santa Cruz, because they only play a couple months a year, only had 4 full-time staff members, making Thiago the 5th. And Thiago took to the opportunity like a duck to water. He did everything from haranguing sponsors into sponsoring the team, to enlisting the local fire department to help put on the matches. It was also notably the first time he was exposed to the other side of the club he had always supported. The general lack of funding, lack of support, and chaos in yearly turnover of state league clubs in Brazil. And like most wide-eyed young fans, he had a bunch of ideas about how to improve the club and improve its sustainability, and he started to espouse these ideas at local dinners that the club would host with all the local leaders in Santa Cruz do Sul. And it turned out those ideas got a following, because in the next presidential election at FC Santa Cruz, the 27-year-old was elected the president of his club, just 2 years after that famous picture was taken where he was the lone fan in the away section. And even Thiago had realized at this point that this was a match made in heaven, and he had started to try and angle his way into being the president. He once said, "It's not an accident that I became the president at 27. So this was part of his ambition too. He realized he might be able to do some good here, and he had this kind of name brand to make it happen. Now, a rather interesting note is that his father was a little more apprehensive about Thiago taking the job, because he'd seen friends of his be elected president of FC Santa Cruz only for it to really mess with them, which points out how small and local a lot of these community clubs are, even if they make it to the top level of the Brazilian State League. But despite the apprehension, Thiago hit the ground running. He started signing a bunch of local grassroots players to year-round contracts, which was unusual and against the way FC Santa Cruz had been doing things. He put together a list of local investors to try and help secure the financial future of the club. And Thiago even said, to begin with, things were great. We got some good players. I got some new sponsors. We started winning. But by the 3rd month, things were going wrong. That's right, this fairy tale is not a straight rocket ride to the top, because they started to run out of money. I know, stunning for a 27-year-old fan who got handed the keys to his favorite club. His plan to offer year-round contracts and play throughout the year was good on paper, but the winter in the state itself is cold and rainy, and so attendances started to fall when matches were being played in the winter, and that threw off the financial projections. He said the fans became discouraged, and so did the sponsors. That's when the club almost fell to the 3rd division. But Thiago was determined to not have that happen. He took a loan out from his dad, used all of his life savings, and maxed out all of his credit cards just to do things like pay player wages throughout the rest of the season. He managed to guide the team clear of relegation to the 3rd division, but just barely, and the one season had left him really scarred. Not just financially, but mentally as well. He slipped into depression and had to go on to medication, and the doctor that was prescribing it to him also advised that he step away from the club for the sake of his health. He was now involved in and the face of his favorite club's own struggles. He said, "I returned home, sitting in my living room. I was very disappointed and financially ruined." Understandably, Thiago Reich did not stand as the club's president in following years, but that did not change FC Santa Cruz's fortunes. It was eventually relegated to the 3rd division, threatening the very existence of the club. All while Thiago, for the sake of his health, tried to avoid the club. According to The Athletic, he worked to just pay off his debts and started working in politics because of all of his politicking experience running the club. But by 2018, avoiding the club would no longer be possible for Thiago. In 2018, they lost every single game, including a friendly against a local team that was slapped together overnight of just random guys from the city. It was that bad. They were wallowing in the depths of the 3rd division of the state league. They were as far away from Grêmio as you could possibly be, and in serious danger of just dissolving as a club. And after 5 years away, watching his club crumble into nothing morning, Thiago decided that it was time for him to return, and he stood for re-election as president of the club. The state of things was so bad that he essentially ran for the president of the club unopposed because, as he said, nobody else wanted it. But perhaps the biggest challenge to actually getting the presidency was telling his dad that he was going to do it. He told The Athletic when he told his dad on the phone that he was going to be the president of FC Santa Cruz again, his dad lost it. I thought he might crash the car into a tree to convince me to abandon the idea, but I just had the feeling it would be different this time. And in a massive deviation from most of the times that sentence has been said in human history, this time it actually was different. Thiago Reik did something incredibly valuable. He learned from his mistakes. He returned to his idea of only using local players around Santa Cruz do Sul to try and reinvest local fans in the club and get the families to come to the matches and raise the attendance. He leaned into his clear gift as a president, the ability to energize a group of people behind a club and an idea. And it worked. The first match, he expected 200 people to be there. 1,000 showed up. It was so crowded, he didn't even watch the whole match. He just spent the match going back and forth to the store, getting more and more hot dogs for the hot dog kiosk because they kept running out. But he also crucially changed his presidential style from his previous iteration. In his speech returning to the presidency, he said about his failure that it motivates me not to stop being a fan, but to be a better president. To him, that meant more modesty, bit less emotional. Don't bother the refs, the coaches, or the players with all of your incessant ideas. Let them do their jobs. And he did. The first year in charge, attendance went back up and the club started to be able to pay off its bills. It's a testament to how much Thiago Reik improved at running a club that even though the next year he ran into a global pandemic, the club was still able to financially survive. He would later tell The Athletic, "I don't understand football tactics much, but I think my job was to bring people together, to create an atmosphere that made people want to be here, from the players to the coaches, the fans." And as for his mental health, he said, "Santa Cruz is my remedy." And he was now running the club so well that the pandemic wasn't a disaster, it actually created an opportunity for FC Santa Cruz. That opportunity would come in the State Cup that we mentioned earlier. It's called the Copa FGF, and it's contested by all the state's clubs. Now, as a result of the pandemic, the number of clubs competing shrank, and some clubs actually opted out of playing in the Copa FGF that year. Rather opportunistically, FC Santa Cruz was able to recruit certain members of those teams that had opted out or weren't playing to play for their club instead, just for the cup. And absolutely unbelievably, from the third division, they won the whole thing. They won the semifinal and the final on penalties, but they won their first ever top-tier state trophy in 100 years of club history. The first one ever, delivered in large part by that lonely fan in the stands who kept the club afloat. Thiago would say it was incredible, fantastic, sensational. I cried. I celebrated. In a particularly touching moment, he actually recreated the famous photo of him alone in the away end, but this time instead of a cup next to him, it's a trophy he helped bring to the club. Winning the Copa FGF put FC Santa Cruz in the massive Copa do Brasil for the first time in their history. Now, they lost in the opening round, of course, but it's a massive tournament, and it was a huge deal for them to be able to play in it. And then the next year, in 2021, as if you couldn't already see the writing on the wall, FC Santa Cruz was promoted back to the second state division. The third division, which Thiago Reik described as a hellscape, had been escaped. But once the club ascended to the second division in a financially healthy state, Thiago once again left the presidency, having avenged the issues and near bankruptcy of his first term. But despite the fact that he was no longer president and had a new shiny job at the mayor's office, he stayed heavily involved. And by heavily involved, I mean he was the vice chairman of the board and the vice president of marketing at the club. And as much as that would have been a lovely end to the story in its own, the fairy tale was not over at that point. The scriptwriters gave us one more twist to the tale. And that brings us to last year, 2023, the final day of the season in the state second division for FC Santa Cruz. And FC Santa Cruz is playing in the final match, playing for promotion back to the top flight of the state. After a match, a season of drama, it all comes down to one penalty kick for midfielder Mauricio. And of course, he has to. You know he did. He scored it. The goal to put FC Santa Cruz back in the top flight for the first time since the year that Thiago Reik was the lone away fan. Except this time, watching them get promoted back to the top level of the state, he was not alone. He was surrounded by thousands of fellow fans. And as the fans celebrated, it was impossible for Thiago Reik not to think back to himself sitting alone alone at Gremio a decade earlier. God looked down on me and said, I'm going to change that kid's destiny. Maybe he's a bit of a Santa Cruz fan too. And this year, on February 17th, FC Santa Cruz will play away against Gremio. And I can guarantee you that Thiago Reig will not be alone. The Athletic and the BBC both have brilliantly written pieces that go in depth on this that I recommend checking out in the description, as well as every other source that we use as a resource for the making of this video. And if you enjoyed it, please do subscribe. If you also want to keep binge watching videos, we have this one. We went to the Faroe Islands for 7 days to investigate Europe's smallest team and just how they're doing it. We also ate fermented sheep. It was a long week.